Hello, everyone. Today in this talk, I would like to draw your attention to the controversial case of Quran translations. In fact, the case takes its origin in the early medieval tradition of tafsir. The plan of my short presentation is like this. So we will start with a reading of Quranic pericope. Then I will mention the main exegetical problems and strategies of their solvent, and then we will speak about the tafsir tradition and medieval one and some modern representatives. Then I will introduce you to Russian Quran translations, and I will show how the case of our today discussion manifests itself in the genre of Quran translation, and I will add with the conclusion and the preliminary argument. To introduce you to the case, I would like to start by reading the Quranic pericope that is based on English Sahih International Translation. I have chosen it simply because it is very literal in wording, so that you may be well equipped in following the discussion. However, I also revise it and I added some additional wording that is based on tafsir variations so that you can spot the difference. So let me read. And to David we gave Solomon, an excellent servant. Indeed, he was one repeatedly turning back to Allah. Mention when they were exhibited before him in the afternoon, Ashi, the poised standing horses. And he said, indeed, I gave preference to the love of good things, horses, over the remembrance of my Lord. Oh, I love the good things, race horses, and my love came from the remembrance of my Lord until the sun or race horses disappeared into the curtain of darkness. He said, return them to me, and set about striking their legs and necks or stroking their legs. So, you see that there are two different scenarios. According to the first popular scenario, which is widely spread and elaborated in tafsir, the Prophet Sulaimān was looking at beautiful horses for a period of time. And he was overwhelmed by their beauty, and because of this, he missed the Asr prayer. Realizing what happened, he asked to return the horses back to him, and he did a hamstring, and then killed the horses for the sake of Allah as a demonstration that he has no worldly attachment. And in return to this action, Allah subjugated the wind to him, which is better than horses in terms of the speed. So as you see in this story, there is a coherence. So it has a clear edificatory value, basically that the heart of a slave should not have a worldly attachment. And if something is left for the sake of Allah, Allah will always replace it by something better. In this scenario, we have a number of problems. The first one is obviously which made many mufassirun uncomfortable, is the issue of missing the obligatory prayer. So we can find different ways and strategies how to overcome it. So some would emphasize that it was not Asr prayer, not obligatory prayer, it was supererogatory, or it was just a dhikr. So we don't find a lot of kind of problematization, a kind of anachronistic application of 5 obligatory prayer in our time in the medieval tradition, but nevertheless, they were unhappy with the idea of Asr prayer. That's why we can find ways how to speak about it in different terms. Another way how to solve this exegetical problem was to speak about the notion of nisyan, that is basically the idea of forgetfulness. Despite the fact that prophets have a high status and they're not similar to ordinary human beings, they're still human beings. and then they may forget things. And if they forget, this is not something which would jeopardize their isma, their infallibility. So as you probably know with the story of Prophet Adam, it also kind of very widely spread idea that he forgot that he should not eat from the tree. So here, some of the Mufassirun were also using the notion of Nisyan to speak about the idea of forgetfulness of a prayer. Another major issue that made many interpreters uncomfortable with this kind of scenario is the problem of hamstring and killing. While let's say, for instance, such exegetes as Tabari, we find just killing. Some later scholars would also try to use a specific terms to explain the goal of it. So it was a kafara, penance, and the killing of horses was not just for nothing. It was a kind of kurban, so it was a food distribution. So such approach makes the story more understandable and more kind of humane in the way of our understanding. So, however, it also brings other problems, such as eating animals such as horses is not a commonly accepted practice. And in fact, we can find a lot of different opinions in this regard in Muslim juridical schools. So another way would be to say that, okay, he killed them, but this killing of animals was considered allowed. So it was not something as we would consider now israf, like wasting. It was allowed in his Sharia, or the eating of horses was allowed in his Sharia without any kind of contestation. So this kind of issue makes it possible to Mufassirun to reconcile this exegetical problems. So with this kind of range of options, as I just mentioned, we find this most popular scenario in support of killing. In the second scenario, the second also popular scenario, it is less spread, but still like many of important names would subscribe to it. And it's still very substantial. So it offers totally different view where in a certain time, the Prophet would look at beautiful horses and he would love them, and his love towards them comes from the remembrance of Allah. So through dhikr, he loves Allah's creation, yani not from his desires. And there is no preference over something, as we saw in the first scenario. So when the Prophet Sulaimān preferred looking at horses and unconsciously forgot, here we find a contrary opinion that love comes out as a result. So, and then Prophet Sulaimān, he asked to return the horses to him, and he started to gently stroke them with love. So we also see the coherence here. And in this case, the strategy to deny narrations which support killing would be to point to external influence like Israeliyat tradition and also the sectarian acceptance. So denial of killing also comes at looking more closely to the text. So there is no sword mentioned, it's just masaha. Touching, which can be interpreted as touching, or if with the sword as killing. So same with the prayer in the ayah. There is no, let me open you. So there is no clearly mentioned Asr prayer, no nafil prayer, it's just mentioned dhikr. So some names like Razi would say that there is no this kind of preference, and love comes as an outcome. So as you have seen, there are a couple of exegetical complexities which various Mufassirun were trying to solve. And I just mentioned the main tafsir heroes that are especially relevant here, since the opinion from them became the basis for contemporary Quran translations. Let's start with At-Tabari, who represent the paradigmatical case of narration-based exegesis. Beginning with At-Tabari, we find the controversy. There are those narrations which support the meaning of killing the horses, and there are those narrations that polarizing view that goes for gentle stroking with love. At-Tabari states his preference for the second opinion, while many of the following Mufassirun after him would not confirm it. So many so-called encyclopedic tafsir, just as Qurtubi or Maturidi, they provide a variety of opinions, but in a much more elaborated and detailed way. In the short works like Jalalain, Baydawi, we stuck with the opinion of killing. Influential Ibn Kathir goes for killing as well. Al-Razi would be mentioned, must be mentioned in this regard for his unique position, totally denying killing as a kind of sectarian influence and supported only gentle stroking. So when we look at the contemporary, like let's say, Turkish Meal by Mahmoud Ufi, or let's say Saudi-based Muyassar and Saadi, we find less options. Like in the last two, we find only killing, and Mahmoud Ufi also support killing, but with some elaborations about the purposes and so on. But the point is, like, when in the medieval exegesis, the case that when given a preference, one has to often make it coherent, but there are still multiple options, and the polyvalence gives a lot of space for a reader as well as for exegetes, and basically both scenarios could coexist. However, in the genre of Quran translation, there is no this space because of just the style of the genre, and Muslim translator would have to make this kind of creative and objective rendering where he would take this authoritative role in selecting the meaning. Quite often this choice is governed by a theological frame in which one operates. So in this case, let's say such issue like prophetic infallibility, isma, could be an important factor for making a choice to fully justify the prophet from all kind of exegetical problems that I mentioned. So if one would prefer to fully sustain isma and fully avoid these kind of issues, that would be more easily to accept the idea of a gentle stroking. However, now I would like to turn first to 4 Russian translations that I have chosen. I have chosen 4 as they are most popular, most debated right now, and what is particularly interesting, 2 of them can be classified as Ash'ari Maturidi, and the other 2 can be classified as Salafi. And by Salafi, I don't mean a kind of identity of the translators, but hermeneutical paradigm, which is represented by a number of features. Among them is a specific approach to names, the Allah names and attributes, and the absence of particular textual sensitivity towards prophetic isma, and some other features. So in the first case, Kalam Sharif is the most recent publication done by teamwork. It is associated with the state institution through by Tatarstan Mufti. Shortly, it is Ash'ari Maturidi self-identification, anti-Salafi flavor, and polemical, supplied by various comments clarifying the notion of prophetic infallibility. The second one is by well-known Tatar Imam Shamil Alauddinov, Azhari trained theologian, closely associated with Moscow Muftiyat and state institutions. He also Ash'ari, and infallibility of the prophet, whose prophethood is supported in his translation. But the specific feature of this translation is the kind of contextualization of the Quranic text to the modern issues. The third is the most widely spread Quran translation by Elvira Kulieva. It is supported by King Fahd complex. It is often associated with Salafism for the preference of literal approach to Asma wa Sifat. And we don't find a specific focus on Isma in this translation. The fourth, by a Tatar translation, by a Tatar translator known as Abu Adil. It is individual project, no state support, but it is based on Saudi Tafsir al-Muyassar. So next slide is a kind, it is the comparison, the following are the comparative charts. So between these four translations, and the first assumption that could be understood is just like the Asharis would be in a position to Salafis as the issue of, in all kind of issues that are related to prophetic infallibility. And the polemics between them would be feasible in taking the most polarizing views. However, this is not the case, and there are much more other influencing issues that govern the translator choices, apart from the creedal reference, especially since both of the cases, the scenarios, both of the scenarios have precedent in authoritative medieval tradition. So in Kalam Sharif, it is distraction that lead to missing the prayer, possibly supererogatory, and then as the outcome, Sulaimān killed the animals. So he killed the animals. And this is explained as a kind of Qurban, so the food distribution. In the explanation why Kalam Sharif decided to use this scenario, their main kind of argument was that we are following the Jumhur, so the majority of Mufassirun. We may also assume that the easiness of accepting eating horses might be the influence from the commonly accepted practice of hypophagy, eating horse meat and among the Tatars in Russia. So with Alauddinov, he preferred gentle stroking and full avoidance of all exegetical problems mentioned before. So there is no forgetting of prayer, etc. As well as he feels that it's important to emphasize that Russian word, which is used by other translators for supporting the first scenario, basically killing, rubit. This word has a kind of violent connotation, and it can be translated in English as a kind of hacking. So, and in relation to Prophet, it does not correspond to Muslim ethics according to Alauddinov. This kind of killing sensitivity, although with different justification, can be noticed in Abu Adil translation too. So when the author goes against his main supplementary source for translation, Saudi al-Muyassar, so he chooses gentle stroking because in his vision, any prophets of Islam are similar to the figure of Prophet Muhammad, at least in some qualities, right? So the Prophet Muhammad and his image shapes the translator's understanding that religion, deen, is rahmah, it is mercy. So if the Prophet Muhammad is a mercy, then all prophets of Islam should be the manifestation of this mercy too. So this kind of prophetic frame shapes the translator choice in case of Abu Adil. Kulieva is similar to Kalam Sharif, as he goes for killing, and it's represented by Russian word rubit again. That is similar to Hakan, as I said. And the emphasis in Kulieva is on the notion of regret that the Prophet Sulaimān felt after the forgetting, being overwhelmed by this kind of horses, which represent metaphorically, according to some of Asirun, the worldly attachment. So, and he also uses the authoritative sources from the medieval and modern tradition. So some people like Ibn Kathir and As-Sa'di are the people who influence this choice. So the process of rendering the story of the Prophet Sulaimān and Horses in all of the analyzed translations show a very diverse subjectivity in understanding the transcendental Quranic narrative. While the theological dogma and some supported position towards prophetic infallibility are important frames through which they select the authoritative sources, the final translator choice is far from being necessarily predetermined by them. In case of Alauddin, the appeal to Muslim ethics as a decisive is decisive for translator choice, as well as a kind of way to criticize other translators. In case of Kalam Sharif, critical selection from the interpretive tradition, as well as presenting it through a kind of culturally acceptable customs, demonstrates how the presented majority opinion is in fact a process of creative deliberation and negotiation. The translations deemed from being from the same interpretive Salafi paradigm display opposite approaches in dealing with sources, as we have seen in case of Kulieva and Abu Adil. And the points of divergence are the case of unexpressed methodologies. The points, like how I should put it, the points of divergence are the cases of unexpressed methodologies of Muslim Quran translations, which evidently go beyond the generally stated information about the sources used, the theological and stylistic approaches. So they often they open the whole new arena for understanding how the classical and post-classical interpretive tradition is examined, negotiated, and continues through the probative lenses of modern Muslim normativity. So that was basically the presentation, and yeah, here I listed the main justificatory sources which each of the translator used. And thank you for your attention.